It was a warm Monday morning when the company finally got the news. Derek Langdon, a man they had never met, was officially taking over as the new boss. The email came from HR, outlining his background, years of experience, a track record of turning companies around, and a reputation for being a hands-on leader. For the past few months, the office had been in turmoil. Their former boss, Emily, had left suddenly after a personal tragedy, and the employees were left adrift, unsure of what to expect. Everyone hoped the new leader would bring stability, perhaps even a sense of direction that had been sorely lacking. At first, Derek's arrival was met with curiosity and a bit of excitement. He was younger than most had expected, a man in his early 40s, sharp-suited and confident. When he walked through the office doors on his first day, a few employees were already gathered in the break room, awkwardly chatting. Derek smiled, gave a firm handshake to a few people, and introduced himself with a self-assured tone. "I'm here to take this company to new heights. I'll be working closely with each of you to make sure we're all aligned and we're all successful. You're the best in your fields, but I'm going to push you harder than you've ever been pushed before." For a moment, the office buzzed with energy. They were hungry for change, some of them even thrilled by the idea of a hard-charging boss. But within the first week, Derek's leadership style began to show its true colors. The first red flag came during a meeting with the team leads. Derek wasted no time in establishing his authority. He stood at the front of the room, a projector screen showing a set of charts and numbers, and began his speech. "We're going to improve every metric every quarter," he said, his voice commanding. "You're all great at what you do, but I need you to be better. We're not here to just make progress. We're here to dominate." The language was aggressive, but what struck people more was the way he conducted himself. As he spoke, Derek made several condescending remarks about previous management, openly criticizing the old strategies that had worked for years. Under Emily, things were too relaxed. "We need structure, control, and constant results." There was an uncomfortable silence in the room. Emily had been well-liked, and while her departure had been sudden, no one had ever felt the need to speak ill of her. Derek's behavior left a sour taste in their mouths. As the days passed, Derek's personality became more apparent. He had a tendency to micromanage, checking in on employees constantly, demanding reports on things that seemed trivial. People were expected to work late without question, and when someone asked for a day off, he would act as if it was a personal affront. But it wasn't just the work culture that was changing. Derek seemed to take pleasure in subtly pitting people against each other. He would make offhand remarks about how one team was doing better than the others or how certain employees were more committed than others. Soon the employees started to feel like they were competing not just for promotions, but for survival within the company. Claire, the head of marketing, was one of the first to notice Derek's manipulative behavior. She had worked with Emily for years and had never felt the tension in the office that was starting to rise now. Derek would take her aside after meetings, telling her, "I don't think you're pushing your team enough, Claire. We need more ambition, more urgency. You're too soft on them." Claire was taken aback. She had always believed in empowering her team, listening to their concerns and fostering collaboration. But Derek's approach was the opposite. He demanded more hours, more productivity, and less concern for personal well-being. Meanwhile, Alex, a senior analyst who had been with the company for 5 years, started to dread Derek's calls. Every time Derek picked up the phone, it was to question Alex's numbers, even when they were flawless. Derek's style was to tear down, never to build up. Alex's confidence began to erode under the constant scrutiny. And then there was Jenna, the young administrative assistant who had recently been promoted. She had always felt like the office was a friendly, tight-knit place, but under Derek she noticed things changing. At first he complimented her work, praised her efficiency. But slowly his remarks started to feel off. One day, as she was organizing his calendar, Derek made a pointed comment. "You know, Jenna, you're doing great. But don't get too comfortable. There's always someone younger, hungrier, ready to take your place." Jenna didn't know how to respond. It was the first time she had felt that kind of subtle threat, the kind that made her question if her job was truly secure. As the weeks went on, the office atmosphere became colder. Derek's words were always sharp, his expectations unreasonable. Employees began to confide in each other, exchanging stories of his bizarre demands and harsh criticisms. But no one dared speak up to him. Everyone feared retaliation, and they knew Derek was quick to discard anyone who didn't fit into his vision of perfection. Yet there was still a sense of loyalty. No one wanted to cause trouble. Some employees tried to convince themselves that Derek was just tough because he wanted the company to succeed. After all, that's what he kept telling them. He wanted them all to be better, to be more successful. But the cracks were starting to show. Derek's leadership style wasn't about improving people. It was about control. It was during a team meeting late one Friday afternoon when the tipping point came. Derek had just finished berating Claire for a minor mistake on a project, in front of the entire department. Claire's face was flushed, and for a moment, it seemed like she might break down. But she held her ground, staring at Derek with a mix of anger and confusion. "Claire, we're going to need better results next week," Derek said, his voice cutting through the tension. "I expect this kind of mistake to be gone by then. Don't disappoint me again." As the team dispersed after the meeting, a sense of unease lingered in the air. People exchanged glances, not sure what to say. Claire stormed off to her office, her face a mix of frustration and disbelief. She had been one of Derek's biggest supporters at first, but now she wasn't so sure. Little did Derek know his reign of intimidation and manipulation had already begun to wear thin. The employees, once hopeful for change, were now realizing that something had to be done. Derek's toxic behavior couldn't go on forever, and as the week ended, the employees began to quietly form an unspoken alliance. They didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: Derek Langdon wouldn't last long in this office. The fall of Derek Langdon had already begun. The office had never felt so divided. The tension that had been simmering under the surface ever since Derek Langdon's arrival now seemed to hang thick in the air, like an impending storm. People whispered in hushed tones by the water cooler, shared quick glances in the hallway, and avoided Derek whenever they could. No one felt safe anymore. Not emotionally, not professionally. And yet no one dared to speak up. At least not yet. Claire was the first to crack. After the disastrous team meeting on Friday, where Derek had publicly humiliated her over a minor mistake, Claire found herself sitting in her office, staring at her computer screen but not seeing anything. Her mind raced. She had always prided herself on being a capable leader, someone who respected and supported her team, but now she felt as if everything she had built was crumbling around her. She didn't understand Derek's approach. He was abrasive, domineering, and dismissive. And though he always couched his criticisms in a polished tone, there was no mistaking the venom that lay just beneath the surface. His goal wasn't to uplift the team, it was to break them down, to assert his dominance. She had seen it before in corporate environments, but never so overtly. Derek had made it clear from day one that he wouldn't tolerate mistakes, and that kind of environment, where fear reigned, was no place for growth. As Claire sat there, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Alex, the senior analyst. "We need to talk. Meet me in the break room in 10. Alex had been quieter than usual lately, more withdrawn. It didn't take much to guess what this meeting would be about. Claire had already heard rumors swirling about Derek's latest behavior. His latest underhanded remarks, his public shaming of employees. And she knew that Alex, being one of the most senior members of the team, was just as frustrated as she was. When Claire walked into the break room, Alex was already there, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee in front of him, tapping it nervously. His face looked worn out, like he hadn't slept in days. "You okay?" Claire asked, pulling out the chair across from him. Alex let out a long sigh. "I don't know anymore. I'm starting to think Derek isn't just a tough leader. He's a bully. And I've had enough of it." Claire nodded, her heart sinking. She had been trying to convince herself that it was just a phase, that Derek would settle into his role and perhaps learn to respect the team. But Alex's words rang true. "I feel the same way," Claire said softly. "I'm being micromanaged every day. I'm not allowed to make decisions without him breathing down my neck. And when I do make a mistake, no matter how small, he humiliates me in front of everyone." Alex's voice dropped to a whisper. "I've been hearing the same from other people. He's turning us against each other, making it feel like we're in a competition. Like we're all expendable." Claire's mind raced. She had been so focused on her own struggles with Derek that she hadn't noticed the full extent of the damage he was doing to the morale of the entire office. Derek had created an environment where trust was eroding, and that kind of division was dangerous. It wasn't just her team, he was slowly poisoning the entire company. "We need to do something," Alex said, his voice firm. I can't work like this anymore. And I know I'm not the only one. Claire felt a wave of relief wash over her. It was the first time since Derek had arrived that someone else had acknowledged the problem. For weeks, Claire had been walking on eggshells, afraid that any open dissent would cost her her job. But now, sitting here with Alex, she felt like there was hope. I agree, Claire replied. But we can't just confront him head-on. He's too powerful. He'd find a way to get rid of anyone who stands up to him. We need to be strategic. I've been thinking about that, Alex said. Maybe it's time we start gathering evidence. He's been making reckless decisions and he's isolating people. Someone has to hold him accountable for all of this. Claire felt a surge of determination. She had never been one for office politics, but this was different. Derek's behavior wasn't just unprofessional, it was toxic. And it was affecting not only the well-being of the employees but also the future of the company. If they didn't do something now, it could all fall apart. We'll start small, Claire said. We'll document everything. His outbursts, his unreasonable demands, the way he treats people. And we'll start talking to others. If we can build enough support, maybe we can go to HR. Maybe even the board. But we need to be careful. Alex nodded. Agreed. We'll have to be discreet. If Derek catches wind of this, he'll make sure we regret it. As the two of them made plans to start documenting Derek's behavior, the rest of the office continued to spiral further into a toxic atmosphere. Employees who had once been friendly and collaborative began to isolate themselves, avoiding one another as if they were all competitors. Everyone was walking on eggshells, afraid that one wrong move would bring down Derek's wrath. One afternoon, Jenna, the young administrative assistant who had recently been promoted, sat at her desk staring at her screen. She had always been a quiet, hard-working employee, but lately she had begun to feel like an outsider. Derek's subtle threats and passive-aggressive comments were starting to take their toll on her. She had always been eager to prove herself, but now she was beginning to doubt her own abilities. She had overheard a conversation between Derek and one of the junior employees earlier that day. The employee had made a minor mistake, and Derek had scolded them so harshly that Jenna could hear the tremor in the employee's voice. Derek had told them in no uncertain terms that their job was on the line and that they needed to shape up or ship out. It was the kind of remark that made Jenna's stomach turn. She had heard rumors of Derek's harsh management style, but hearing it firsthand was different. It made her question whether she would be next. Her thoughts were interrupted when Derek walked by her desk, stopping to glance at her computer screen. Jenna, he said, his tone cold. You're wasting too much time on personal tasks. Get back to work. Jenna's face flushed with embarrassment. She had been making travel arrangements for a client, something that was part of her job description, but Derek didn't seem to care. She nodded quickly, feeling small and insignificant in his presence. As Derek walked away, Jenna felt a pang of fear. She didn't know how much longer she could take this. The thought of facing Derek's wrath over something so trivial was unbearable. She longed for the support of her co-workers, but everyone seemed too scared to speak up. The rebellion was starting, though. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, but it was growing. In the quiet corners of the office, in hushed conversations between employees, the realization was sinking in. Derek Langdon's days as the boss might be numbered. And if they wanted to survive, they would have to fight back. Together. It had been 2 weeks since Claire and Alex had started documenting Derek's behavior. During that time, the atmosphere at the office had only gotten worse. Derek's micromanagement was now a constant presence. He walked through the halls like a hawk, scrutinizing every detail from how employees organized their desks to the tone of their emails. He'd nitpick over the smallest errors, making sure to address them in front of everyone as if to send a message. Perfection was the only acceptable outcome. As Claire continued her quiet rebellion, she started noticing the change in her colleagues. More and more people were becoming disillusioned with Derek's leadership. Alex was right. They weren't alone in their frustrations. But there was still fear in the office, and fear had a way of keeping people silent. People were afraid of losing their jobs, afraid of being the next one to be publicly humiliated in front of the entire company. One day, as Claire passed by the open workspace where Jenna usually sat, she noticed the young assistant staring at her screen, looking pale and drained. Jenna had always been a bright, energetic person, one of the few who actually seemed excited about the work they did. But lately, Claire could see the toll Derek's behavior had taken on her. Jenna, are you all right? Claire asked gently, stopping beside her desk. Jenna looked up, startled, then forced a smile. Oh, hi Claire. I'm fine. Just a little behind on work. You know how it is. Claire raised an eyebrow, knowing that wasn't the full story. If you ever need to talk, I'm here. Jenna hesitated for a moment, then lowered her voice, glancing around nervously. I don't know how much longer I can take this. I'm constantly on edge. Derek has been breathing down my neck about every little thing and I can't seem to do anything right. He's always criticizing me like I'm some kind of screw-up. Claire's heart sank. She had seen the same thing happening to others, but hearing it from Jenna made it feel real. You're not a screw-up, Jenna, Claire said, her voice firm. I've seen your work. You're doing great. I know, Jenna replied quietly, but Derek, he doesn't see it that way. He keeps telling me that I'm not performing to his standards. And I'm scared. I'm scared he's going to fire me. Claire's mind raced. He had to do something. If the rebellion was going to succeed, they couldn't do it alone. They needed more people, more voices. She needed to make Jenna feel like she wasn't alone in this. You're not alone in this, Claire said, a little more fiercely than she had intended. We're all feeling the same way. But we can't just sit back and let Derek tear us down. We need to fight back. Jenna looked up, her eyes wide. Fight back? What do you mean? Claire leaned in closer, lowering her voice. There's a group of us. People who are fed up with the way Derek's running things. We've been gathering evidence of his behavior, his mistakes, and the way he's treating people. We're going to take it to HR, but we need more people. We need your help. Jenna's eyes flickered with a mixture of shock and hope. You really think we can do something about it? Claire nodded. We can't let him destroy this place. If we all come together, we can make him see that he can't treat us this way. For the first time in weeks, Jenna felt a glimmer of hope. She hadn't realized there were others who felt the same way. It was one thing to hear about Derek's behavior from Alex and Claire, but it was something entirely different to realize that she wasn't the only one struggling. It was time to take action. The next few days passed in a blur of whispered conversations and secret meetings. Claire, Alex, and Jenna worked quietly to gather more evidence, reaching out to other employees who had suffered at the hands of Derek's cruelty. They documented every instance of mistreatment, every inappropriate remark, and every incident where Derek's actions had harmed the company. In the break room, they began to gather a small group of people who were willing to take a stand. There was Mark, the senior developer who had been ignored for weeks when he suggested changes that could improve the workflow. There was Rachel, a project manager who had been constantly belittled in front of her team. And there was Sam, a junior employee who had witnessed Derek's attempts to divide the office, creating a culture of mistrust. Each of them had their own stories to tell, their own experiences with Derek's toxic leadership. As they shared their stories, Claire could feel the momentum building. They weren't alone in this fight anymore. But there was still a sense of unease in the group. They all knew that taking on Derek meant risking their careers. If they failed, they would be labeled as troublemakers and Derek would find a way to ensure they were removed from the company. We need to be careful, Alex warned during one of their meetings. Derek's not going to go down without a fight. He's not going to let us expose him so easily. I know, Claire replied. But we have to try. If we don't, it'll only get worse. He's already alienating half the office. We can't let him keep doing this. They all nodded in agreement. It wasn't just about making Derek pay for the way he treated them. It was about protecting the future of the company. If they allowed Derek to continue, the damage could be irreversible. The morale of the entire office was at an all-time low, and the company's culture had become a toxic wasteland. It was the following Monday when Derek made his biggest mistake. Claire had just finished a meeting with her team, feeling drained but hopeful, when she received a sudden email from Derek. It was one of those infamous urgent emails he sent without warning, demanding that she meet with him immediately. She didn't know what to expect, but her heart pounded as she walked toward his office. When she knocked on the door and entered, Derek was sitting behind his desk, his usual smirk on his face. Claire, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. I've been looking at your team's performance metrics. Let's just say I'm not impressed. I need you to get your act together. We can't afford any more mistakes. Claire tried to keep her composure. I'm doing everything I can to improve my team's performance, Derek. We're making progress. Progress. Derek scoffed, leaning back in his chair. Your progress isn't good enough. You're not pushing them hard enough. You're too soft on them, Claire. You need to be more aggressive or I'll find someone who will be. There was the same old criticism. The same dismissive attitude. But this time Claire had had enough. I've been pushing my team, Derek, Claire said firmly, her voice steady. But if you want to continue treating us like this, if you want to continue tearing people down instead of building them up, then maybe I'm not the right person for this job. For a moment, Derek just stared at her, his smirk faltering. He hadn't expected this. Claire had always been compliant, always willing to take his harsh words without retaliation. But today she wasn't backing down. Before he could respond, Claire turned and walked out of his office, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. The rebellion had officially begun. The days following Claire's confrontation with Derek were filled with uncertainty. As she walked back to her office after their brief exchange, she could feel the weight of her words still hanging in the air. Derek hadn't responded. He had merely watched her leave, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Was it anger? Surprise? Or was it the first crack in the armor of his smug, unshakable confidence? No one in the office seemed to know what had transpired. For all of Derek's cruelty, he was never one to let things slip. He controlled the narrative, shaping the way people saw him. But Claire had done something that wasn't easily forgotten. She had stood up to him. She had shown that he wasn't invincible. The tension in the office was palpable. The subtle undercurrent of fear that had once plagued every hallway now seemed to be shifting. Employees had been whispering for days, trying to gauge what would happen next. But the truth was that no one knew. Derek was unpredictable. His reactions to insubordination were legendary. Would he lash out at Claire? Would he retaliate against the entire team? It was a Tuesday afternoon when Claire found out just how far Derek was willing to go to maintain control. She was sitting in her office, reviewing the latest project reports when she heard a knock on her door. Startled, she looked up to see Sam standing there, his face pale. "Claire, we need to talk," he said, his voice low. Claire motioned for him to come in. "What's going on?" Sam glanced over his shoulder before stepping inside, closing the door behind him. He took a deep breath before speaking again. "It's Derek. He's been watching everything. He's been going through emails, monitoring everything we do. And he's looking for anyone to blame. People are scared." Claire's heart sank. She had been expecting Derek to retaliate, but she hadn't realized just how far he was willing to go. Derek's control over the office had always been suffocating, but now it seemed like he was taking things to a whole new level. No one was safe, not even behind closed doors. "What do you mean, monitoring everything?" Claire asked, her voice a mixture of disbelief and anger. "People are getting called into his office for the smallest things. He's accusing people of mismanaging projects, even when they've done everything right. He's making threats to fire people if they don't perform the way he wants." Claire felt a cold rush of fear. If Derek was going after everyone now, that meant his grip on the office was tightening. There was no telling who he'd target next, or how far he'd go to break them. "Have you talked to anyone else about this?" Claire asked. "I'm not the only one he's targeting. Mark's been called in twice this week alone," Sam said. "But it's not just the senior employees. He's going after everyone. Even the new hires." This was it. Derek had pushed too far. If he was targeting the whole office, it wasn't just an issue of personal grievances anymore. It was about survival. "I need to talk to Alex," Claire said, her mind racing. "We need to get more people on board. We can't just sit back and let him destroy the entire company." That evening, Claire, Alex, Sam, and a few others met in a quiet corner of the local cafe, away from the prying eyes of Derek and his watchful gaze. The group had grown steadily in the past week as more and more employees came forward, disillusioned with Derek's reign of terror. Mark, Rachel, and Jenna joined them, their faces filled with determination and a hint of nervousness. "We need to take this to the next level," Claire said, speaking in a hushed tone. "Derek is getting more desperate. He's watching us. He's trying to break us down individually so he can control the narrative." "But how do we fight back?" Rachel asked, looking uncertain. "He's got so much power. How can we stand up to him?" "We gather evidence," Alex said firmly. "We keep documenting everything. We find a pattern. And we start organizing. But we have to be careful. Derek's not stupid. He'll try to turn things around if we give him the chance. I don't know how much longer I can take this, Jenna admitted. I've been feeling like I'm walking on eggshells every day. Every time Derek looks at me, I feel like he's about to fire me. We're not in this alone, Claire reminded them. The more of us that speak out, the harder it will be for him to control us. But we have to be smart about it. We need to keep our heads down for now, gather everything we can. The moment we have enough evidence, we go to HR. If that doesn't work, we go to the board. What if it's not enough? Mark asked, his voice filled with concern. What if Derek finds out? We're not going to be reckless, Claire assured him. We need to be strategic. But if we can show that his behavior is hurting the company, if we can prove that he's the one sabotaging everything, it won't be easy for him to deny. The plan was set. They would continue to document Derek's behavior. Every email, every meeting, every conversation. They would collect witness statements from employees who had been affected by Derek's actions. And when they had enough, they would take it to HR. But as they discussed their next steps, the group couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were walking a tightrope. Derek was ruthless. He was unpredictable. And if they made one wrong move, it could all backfire. The next morning, Derek called Claire into his office. His demeanor was calm, almost too calm. Claire's heart raced as she walked into the room, taking a seat across from him. She couldn't read him, he was always so composed, so controlled. But today something felt off. Claire, Derek began, his voice smooth and measured. I've been thinking about our conversation the other day. I want to make sure we're on the same page moving forward. Claire remained silent, waiting for him to continue. She could feel the tension in the air, and she knew this wasn't going to be a typical meeting. I think you've got potential, Derek said, his tone almost patronizing. But I need you to understand something. You and your team are underperforming. You're not meeting my standards. And if you don't step up, I'll have no choice but to make some changes. Claire kept her gaze steady. I've been doing everything I can to meet your expectations, Derek. But I won't sacrifice my integrity or my team for the sake of your standards. We're doing the best we can under the circumstances. Derek's smile faded. I'm afraid that's not good enough. The coldness in his voice sent a chill down Claire's spine. She knew he wasn't going to back down. And in that moment, Claire realized something important. Derek wasn't just a toxic boss. He was dangerous. And she wasn't going to stop until she saw him fall. The tension in the office had reached a fever pitch. Every corner, every hallway felt like a battlefield. Claire could sense the unease in the air, the constant whispering, the hurried steps of her colleagues as they tried to avoid Derek's gaze. He had become more unpredictable, more volatile. The more desperate he grew to maintain control, the more erratic his behavior became. It was clear that the walls were closing in around him, and he wasn't going down without a fight. Claire spent her days now on high alert, always aware of Derek's movements. She kept a low profile, working quietly with Alex, Sam, and the rest of the group, collecting every shred of evidence they could find. Emails, documents, statements from employees. Anything that could prove Derek's toxic leadership was damaging the company and its employees. But even as they worked diligently, Claire knew that the clock was ticking. They needed to act fast. Derek wasn't a fool. He would soon catch wind of their growing resistance. It was Thursday afternoon when the breaking point came. Claire had just returned from a meeting with a potential client when she received an urgent text from Alex. The message was short but alarming. Derek is coming for you. He knows. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the message again. How had Derek found out? They had been so careful, so methodical. Had someone tipped him off? She quickly gathered her things and rushed back to the office, her mind racing with possibilities. As she walked through the lobby, she could already feel the shift in the air. There was an unusual stillness, an energy that seemed to hum with anticipation. Employees moved quickly, avoiding eye contact, their faces tense. It was clear that something was about to happen. When she reached her office, she found Alex waiting for her. He stood up as soon as she walked in, his expression grim. Derek knows Claire, Alex said without preamble. He's on to us. How? Claire asked, her voice low, her pulse quickening. How could he know? I don't know, Alex replied, shaking his head. But he called a meeting for the entire team. He's going to expose everything, Claire. This isn't just about us anymore. He's going to tear the whole office apart. Claire's stomach churned. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore. Derek wasn't going to let this slide. He was going to go after everyone. He was going to make sure they paid for even thinking about challenging him. Before she could say anything else, her phone rang. It was from Derek. "Claire," he said, his voice dripping with mock sweetness. "I need you in my office. Now." It wasn't a request. It was an order. Claire's heart pounded in her chest as she stood up, her fingers trembling as she put down the phone. This was it. The moment they had all been dreading. Derek had found out and he wasn't going to let them get away with it. When Claire entered Derek's office, the atmosphere was thick with tension. He sat behind his desk, his hands steepled in front of him, his expression cold and unreadable. There was no warmth, no hint of the charm he usually exuded when he wanted something. This was the Derek who thrived on power, who relished in control. This was the Derek who had pushed them all to the edge. "Close the door," he said, his voice low. Claire did as instructed, then stood silently before his desk, waiting for him to speak. He didn't waste any time. "I know what you've been doing, Claire," Derek said, his voice flat. "I know about your little group. I know about the evidence you've been gathering. You think I didn't notice the whispers, the undercurrent of rebellion? You think I didn't see it coming?" Claire stood tall, her heart racing but her expression resolute. She wasn't going to back down now. Not after everything. "I'm not afraid of you, Derek," she said, her voice steady despite the rising tension. "What you're doing to this company is wrong. What you're doing to the people here is wrong. We're not going to let you destroy this place." Derek's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, there was a flash of fury in them. But just as quickly he masked it with a smirk. "You really think you can take me down?" he asked, his voice tinged with amusement. "You think you can just expose me and expect everyone to side with you? You're a fool, Claire. You're out of your depth." Claire's jaw tightened. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her. She wasn't going to let him belittle her anymore. "No, Derek," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I'm not the fool. You are. And you've pushed us too far. This isn't just about me anymore. This is about all of us." Derek stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back. His fists clenched at his sides, and for a moment, Claire thought he might strike her. But instead he took a deep breath, his face twisted in a mask of rage. "You want to play this game, Claire?" he hissed. "Fine. But don't think for a second that you're going to win. I've built this company. I've made it what it is. You think I'm just going to let a group of disgruntled employees bring it all down? You think I'll let you ruin everything I've worked for?" Claire's mind raced. He had to stay calm. He had to stay focused. "You've built it on lies, Derek. On manipulation and fear," Claire said, her voice rising. "You've destroyed everything that made this company great. And it's not just me who sees it. It's everyone. We're done being your pawns." For a long moment, Derek just stared at her as if weighing her words. Then with a sneer he spoke. "You think you're a hero, don't you?" he said bitterly. "You think you're going to save everyone from me? You're nothing, Claire. You're just a footnote in this company's history. And when I'm done with you, you'll be out of here so fast you won't even know what hit you." Claire stood her ground, refusing to back down. She could feel the weight of his threats, but she also felt something else. Something stronger. The fear that had once gripped her was gone, replaced with a quiet resolve. She wasn't going to let Derek break her. Not now. Not ever. "You're wrong," Claire said, her voice firm. "This isn't about me. This is about the future of this company. And we're not going to let you destroy it any longer." As she turned to leave Derek's office, her heart still pounding, Claire knew that the battle was far from over. But she also knew something important. The power was shifting. Derek's grip on the company was slipping. And no matter how hard he fought, no matter how much he tried to tear them down, he couldn't stop what was coming. The resistance was growing stronger. And Claire was ready for whatever came next. The days that followed Claire's confrontation with Derek were filled with uncertainty, but also a quiet sense of determination. Derek's threats were still hanging over her head, but for the first time, Claire felt like she wasn't alone in this fight. The small group of colleagues who had banded together in secret were now unified in their resolve, and they had a plan. The evidence they had gathered was undeniable. Derek's toxic behavior, his manipulative tactics, and the way he had pushed the company and its employees to the brink were all documented. They had everything they needed to expose him. But Derek wasn't going to go down without a fight. Claire knew that. He was dangerous, unpredictable, and he still had power. He had the board on his side and his influence reached deep within the company. If they wanted to take him down, they would need more than just evidence. They needed strategy, careful planning, and a united front. They needed to be ready for whatever Derek would throw at them next. It was late on a Friday afternoon when things began to take a turn. Claire was at her desk reviewing some new project proposals when she received an unexpected email. The subject line simply read, "Board meeting, urgent." Her heart skipped a beat. This wasn't a normal meeting invitation. Derek had called an emergency board meeting. Claire could feel a knot form in her stomach. It wasn't unusual for Derek to call meetings to discuss strategy or new ideas, but the word urgent meant something was about to happen. Something big. She quickly forwarded the email to Alex and the others, alerting them that something was in motion. They had to act quickly. If Derek was calling the board in, he was planning something. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. The following Monday, Claire arrived at work with a sense of anticipation in the air. Everyone was on edge, whispering amongst themselves as they tried to figure out what Derek was planning. She could see the worry in their eyes. The fear that had always been present in the office was now tangible, suffocating. As the morning went on, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She kept glancing at her phone, waiting for an update from Alex, but there was nothing. It wasn't until noon that she received a call from Sam. His voice was filled with urgency. "Claire, you need to get to the boardroom now," Sam said. "They're calling a meeting and Derek's about to make his move." Claire's pulse quickened. This was it. She grabbed her notebook, took a deep breath, and made her way toward the boardroom. The air in the hallway felt thicker, as if it were closing in around her. She wasn't just walking into a meeting anymore. She was walking into the heart of the storm. When she reached the boardroom, she found that several members of the senior leadership team were already inside, including Derek, who stood at the head of the table, his usual smug expression plastered on his face. The room fell silent when Claire entered, and Derek's gaze flicked toward her, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Ah, Claire," Derek said, his voice smooth, almost too calm. "I'm glad you could join us. I trust you've been keeping busy." Claire took her seat at the table, her back straight, her hands clasped firmly in front of her. She refused to let him intimidate her. This was her moment. This was the moment they would take him down. "I've called this meeting to address some serious concerns regarding the direction of this company," Derek began, his tone now taking on a more serious edge. "As you all know, we've had some disruptions in recent weeks. The performance of certain teams has been lacking, and we need to discuss how we're going to fix that." Claire exchanged a glance with Alex, who was seated a few chairs down from her. Derek wasn't wasting any time. He was about to shift the blame. He was about to make this all about the employees, about the team's failures, rather than his own toxic leadership. "We've made some tough decisions," Derek continued. "And moving forward, there will be consequences for those who fail to meet expectations. I'm here to ensure that we keep this company on track. We can't afford any more disruptions." Claire's blood boiled. This was his usual tactic, deflecting blame, avoiding responsibility, and manipulating the situation to suit his needs. But Claire wasn't going to let him get away with it this time. "I disagree, Derek," Claire said, her voice cutting through the tension. "The issue isn't with the teams. The issue is with your leadership. You've created an environment of fear. People are scared to speak up, scared to make mistakes, because you've made it clear that any sign of weakness will be punished." Derek's eyes narrowed, but he didn't respond immediately. The rest of the room fell into an uncomfortable silence as they waited for him to react. "I've worked here for 5 years," Claire continued, her voice steady but growing in intensity. "I've seen the way you treat people, the way you manipulate the situation to benefit yourself. Toxic. And it's damaging not just the company but the people who work here. You're the problem, Derek. Not the employees." A murmur rippled through the room. The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure of how to respond. Claire's words were hitting a nerve. Derek's grip on the company and the board was starting to slip. Derek's face flushed, his calm demeanor cracking just slightly. "You're out of line, Claire," he spat. "You have no idea what it takes to run this company. You're in over your head." "I think the board would disagree," Claire said coolly, turning to face the other members of the room. "I've spoken with several colleagues. People who are just as unhappy with your leadership as I am. You're not just affecting the employees, Derek. You're affecting the future of this company. And if you don't start listening to us, things are going to get worse. This isn't just my fight. It's everyone's. There was a long pause. The room was still, the tension so thick it felt suffocating. Derek's eyes darted to the board members, his face now twisted with fury. But no one spoke. No one came to his defense. Claire held her ground, her gaze unwavering. The moment was upon them. Derek's reign was crumbling and he knew it. I've had enough of this, Derek muttered, slamming his hand on the table. You'll regret this, Claire. You'll regret crossing me. But the damage had been done. The board members who had once been blindly loyal to Derek were now questioning everything. His facade was cracking and they could see it. They could see the manipulation, the deceit, the toxic environment he had fostered. It was clear that this meeting had been the beginning of the end for Derek. The atmosphere in the boardroom had shifted dramatically after Claire's confrontation with Derek. What had begun as an intense power struggle between her and the toxic boss had quickly evolved into a full-scale internal battle for the future of the company. Derek's facade of invincibility, his unchecked authority, had been exposed. The board members who had once feared him now looked at him with skepticism. Claire knew this was the moment they needed to capitalize on. It was time to make Derek's fall inevitable. As the meeting ended and the board members filtered out one by one, Claire's mind raced. She had spoken her truth, but there was still more to do. Alex, Sam, and the others had done their part, collecting all the evidence they could find, and now it was time to take the final step. The next morning, Claire arrived at work early, before the usual rush of employees flooded in. She walked past the desks, her mind focused, determined. Today wasn't going to be like any other day. Today, Derek's reign of fear and manipulation was going to end. She could feel the shift, the change in the air. It wasn't just her anymore. She had the support of the team, the employees who had been silenced for far too long, and even a few hesitant members of the board. They were ready to act. As Claire entered her office, she found Alex already waiting for her, his face tense but determined. He didn't need to say anything. He knew this moment had come. The plan they had crafted together was about to unfold. Do we have everything? Claire asked, her voice steady. We're ready, Alex replied, holding up a folder. We've got the emails, the documents, and the testimonies from employees who are ready to speak up. This is all the proof we need. Once we present this to the board, Derek won't have anywhere to hide. Claire took a deep breath. This was it. She had come a long way from the woman who had been afraid to stand up to Derek. She had found her voice and she wasn't going to let it be silenced now. Let's do it, she said, her voice calm but firm. In the afternoon, the board had been called to an emergency session. Derek was present, of course, but this time his posture was different. The smug confidence he had once carried with him had faltered, replaced by a stiff nervousness he couldn't quite hide. It was as if he knew what was coming and he was scrambling to maintain control. The boardroom was tense as everyone took their seats. Claire, Alex, and Sam were seated together, a quiet solidarity between them. Derek stood at the head of the table, but for once he wasn't in control of the room. Claire felt the shift in power, a wave of strength building within her. The meeting began as usual, with Derek trying to dominate the conversation. He started talking about company profits and strategies, his voice smooth, but Claire could see the cracks beneath the surface. She exchanged a look with Alex, who nodded. It was time. Claire stood up, her voice cutting through the noise. I have something I need to address, Derek, she said, her tone unwavering. Something that cannot be ignored any longer. Derek's eyes narrowed, but Claire continued before he could respond. She walked to the front of the room where a projector had already been set up. She clicked a button on the remote and the screen lit up with a series of emails, documents, and shocking evidence. The room fell silent as Derek's toxic leadership unfolded in front of their eyes. There were emails where he'd belittled employees, messages detailing how he had manipulated people into doing things they didn't want to do, and documents revealing the extensive cover-ups that had been happening under his watch. The evidence was irrefutable. Claire looked at the board members. This is the truth. This is the reality of what's been happening in this company. This is the man you've been supporting. Derek's face had turned pale. He stood frozen at the head of the table, his mouth opening and closing as he tried to find the words to defend himself, but there were none. The evidence was too overwhelming. His attempts to manipulate the board had failed. His facade had shattered. You think you can just walk in here and accuse me of all this? Derek finally spat, his voice shaking with rage. You think this is going to work, Claire? You think they're going to believe you? But Claire didn't flinch. It's not just me, Derek, she said. It's all of us. The employees who are too afraid to speak up. The team you've broken down, the people you've hurt. They're ready to stand with us. The truth is out, and it's time for you to take responsibility for what you've done. The room was eerily quiet as Derek's world crumbled around him. The board members, once loyal to him, were now exchanging uneasy glances. Some were looking at the evidence, some at Claire and some at Derek as if they were seeing him for the first time. The power that he had once held over them was gone. One by one, board members began to speak up. I had no idea, one of them said, shaking his head. This changes everything. I've been hearing rumors, but I didn't know it was this bad, another board member murmured, her face pale. Claire turned to face them. It's not just about the rumors anymore. It's about the future of this company. It's about doing what's right. And then the board member who had been the most vocal in supporting Derek stood up. I think we've seen enough, he said, his voice firm. It's time for a change. It was happening. Derek was losing his grip, piece by piece. The board was turning against him. Derek, now visibly shaken, stepped back from the table, his eyes wild with panic. You can't do this, he hissed. You can't just take everything I've built. This company is mine. I made it what it is. Claire shook her head. No, Derek. You didn't. You destroyed it. And now it's time for you to go. The board members voted swiftly and it was unanimous. Derek was removed from his position as CEO, effective immediately. The once untouchable tyrant who had ruled with fear and manipulation was no longer in power. As Claire left the boardroom, her heart pounding with exhilaration, she knew that this was only the beginning. The company would need time to heal, but this was the first step toward recovery. The employees would no longer be afraid. The toxic culture that Derek had fostered would begin to dissipate. It was a new era for the company, and Claire had been the catalyst for change. But as she walked out into the hallway, she couldn't help but feel a sense of disbelief. The man who had controlled their lives, who had made them fear for their jobs, who had turned their everyday work into a battle for survival, he was gone. And for the first time in years, the future felt wide open. The weeks that followed Derek's removal were filled with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. The atmosphere at the company had shifted drastically. For the first time in years, employees were beginning to speak freely, to feel as though their voices mattered. The oppressive cloud that Derek had cast over the office was slowly beginning to lift. It wasn't an instant change, but it was a start. Claire watched as the employees she had once seen cower under Derek's rule began to stand tall again. There was an air of cautious optimism in the office, but it was clear that the work was far from over. The scars that Derek had left on the company's culture ran deep. People had been silenced for so long, their talents and potential stifled by fear. Now that he was gone, it was time for healing, but healing wasn't something that could happen overnight. Claire took on a new role within the company, interim CEO. She hadn't planned for this, but she had proven herself to the board and the employees, and they had voted for her leadership. It wasn't a title she had expected to wear, but it felt right. This was her chance to rebuild the company from the ground up, to create a culture where employees felt valued, where transparency and honesty were the cornerstones of success. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was ready. One afternoon, Claire sat down with Alex in her office, the weight of the future pressing on her shoulders. They had been working tirelessly to create a new vision for the company, one that aligned with their values that Derek had never understood. It was time to set new goals, new expectations, and most importantly, new ways of operating. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, Claire said, rubbing her eyes tiredly. But we're in a good position. The board is on board and the employees are looking to us for direction. We need to make sure we don't repeat the same mistakes. Alex nodded, his expression thoughtful. We've got to show them that this isn't just about getting rid of Derek. It's about creating a culture of respect, trust, and collaboration. We need to build something stronger than what we had before. Claire smiled, appreciating Alex's unwavering support. Exactly. But we also need to acknowledge the damage that's been done. People aren't just going to forget the way things were. We need to rebuild their trust, piece by piece. As they discussed their plans, Claire couldn't help but think back to the days when Derek had ruled the company with an iron fist. How he had made everyone feel small, insignificant, and replaceable. How he had used his power to manipulate and control, to pit people against each other. It had been a toxic environment, and it had cost the company more than just morale. It had cost them talent, creativity, and innovation. But now, with Derek gone, there was a chance to turn things around. It wouldn't be easy and it wouldn't happen overnight, but it was possible. They had the foundation, the employees, the vision, and the drive. All they needed was the courage to move forward and build something better. The boardroom had never felt this different. The last time Claire had walked in here, it had been under tense circumstances, with Derek at the head of the table ruling with fear. Now she stood in front of the same group of board members, but this time the atmosphere was full of hope, anticipation, and a shared sense of purpose. "I've asked you all here today," Claire began, her voice steady, "because we need to chart a new course for this company. The way things were under Derek's leadership was unsustainable. It was toxic, and it damaged not just our bottom line but our people. We've seen the consequences of that firsthand." The board members nodded, some of them looking uncomfortable but all of them attentive. They knew the truth now. They couldn't deny it any longer. "We've already begun the process of rebuilding," Claire continued. "We've been working closely with the employees, gathering their feedback, and starting to implement the changes that will ensure this company becomes a place of respect, collaboration, and growth. But we need your full support to make this vision a reality. We need your commitment to this new direction." For a moment the room was silent. Claire held her breath, unsure of what the response would be. These were the same board members who had once backed Derek without question. Would they be willing to change? Would they trust her to lead them in a new direction? Finally, one of the board members, a woman named Linda, spoke up. "Claire, I'll be honest. I was hesitant at first. I've seen a lot of leaders come and go, and I wasn't sure if you could step into Derek's shoes. But you've proven yourself. You've shown us that you're not just about business as usual. You're about changing the culture, making it better for everyone." Another board member, Paul, nodded. "I agree. Derek's way wasn't working, and it's clear that things need to change. We're with you, Claire. Let's do this." Claire's heart swelled with pride. It wasn't just about her. It was about the team, the employees, and the company as a whole. They had all come together to fight for something better, and now they were on the same page. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the moment they could begin to heal and rebuild. As the board meeting adjourned, Claire felt a sense of accomplishment. The road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but the first step had been taken. The company was on a new path, and the toxic grip of Derek's influence had been shattered. There would be setbacks, no doubt. There would be moments of doubt and fear, but with the support of the employees and the board, Claire was confident they could turn things around. As she walked out of the boardroom, Alex was waiting for her in the hallway, a look of relief on his face. "You did it," he said, offering a smile. "They're with us." Claire nodded, a smile tugging at her lips. "It's just the beginning. We've got a lot of work to do, but at least now we're heading in the right direction." They walked down the hallway together, their steps in sync. Claire felt lighter than she had in years. The weight of the past was still there, but the future felt brighter, filled with possibility. There was work to be done, but she was ready for it. And for the first time in a long time, so was everyone else. It had been a month since Derek's removal, and things at the company had changed in ways that Claire had only dared to hope for. The air was lighter, the tension that had once hung like a cloud had lifted. Employees no longer feared walking into the office. There was a palpable sense of freedom, and with that freedom came renewed energy. The company was slowly but surely healing from the wounds that Derek had inflicted over the years. But Claire knew that the real work had just begun. Rebuilding trust and culture couldn't happen overnight. She couldn't just erase the damage that had been done, but she could create the foundation for something better. She'd set the wheels in motion, but now it was time to make sure the company didn't just survive but thrived. Claire stood at the front of the conference room preparing for her speech. It was her first official presentation as the permanent CEO of the company. She wasn't just leading a meeting today. She was about to lay out a new vision for the company, one that would steer them in a direction where success wasn't just defined by profits but by the well-being of their people. She took a deep breath as the board members, department heads, and key team leaders filled the room. The employees who had once been afraid to speak up now sat with their heads held high, ready to contribute. It wasn't just Claire's voice they were listening to anymore. It was the collective voice of the company. They were all in this together. "Good morning, everyone," Claire began, her voice calm but confident. "It's been a month since we made a pivotal decision in removing Derek from his position. And I know the changes we've started aren't going to be easy, but they're necessary. We've had to face some uncomfortable truths about the way this company has been run in the past, but now we have a chance to build something better." There was a murmur of agreement around the room, and Claire could sense the renewed hope. The employees were with her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was part of something that was bigger than just her own ambitions. This wasn't about her career anymore. It was about changing the entire culture of the company for the better. "The past few years have been difficult for many of us," Claire continued. "I know there are scars that won't disappear overnight. But we've started to rebuild. We've started to create a space where we can all grow and thrive. And today, I want to lay out our vision moving forward." She clicked a button on the remote, and the presentation screen behind her lit up with bold letters. "Our new vision. We are going to build a company that is driven by transparency, collaboration, and respect. A company where every voice matters and where every person is given the tools to succeed. We are going to prioritize our people, because without them there is no company. And we are going to create a culture where trust is our foundation." The room fell silent as Claire's words resonated with everyone present. It was a stark contrast to the toxic fear-based culture they had lived under for so long. Now there was a sense of unity in the air, a collective desire to make this vision a reality. "The first step in this process is restructuring our leadership team," Claire continued. "We're bringing in fresh perspectives, new leaders who share our values and are committed to fostering an environment where everyone feels safe, heard, and valued. We will also be implementing mentorship programs, skills development workshops, and opportunities for all of you to contribute to decision-making. This is your company now. I'm just here to guide it." There was a round of applause, and Claire could see the genuine relief and excitement in the faces of her team. For the first time, they believed in what she was saying. They knew this wasn't just empty rhetoric. Claire had already shown them that she was committed to change by her actions, not just her words. As the meeting continued, Claire laid out detailed plans for the next steps, including the introduction of new performance metrics that focused on employee growth, mental health initiatives, and new communication channels to encourage openness. She knew that these changes would take time, but she also knew that they were essential to create a sustainable, healthy work environment. The weeks following Claire's announcement were filled with action. The leadership team underwent a restructuring process, bringing in people who were dedicated to supporting employees, not just the bottom line. Departments that had once been siloed now collaborated, sharing ideas and strategies in ways that had never happened before. The new leaders Claire had brought in were visible, engaged, and approachable, completely different from the shadowy figures who had served under Derek. But the real work lay in changing the company's culture. Claire and her team organized town hall meetings where employees could voice concerns, offer suggestions, and ask questions. They introduced regular check-ins with department heads to ensure that employees felt supported and empowered. They also rolled out mental health programs, understanding that the trauma of Derek's leadership had left its mark on many employees. Sam and Alex, who had been integral in helping Claire expose Derek's misdeeds, continued to support her throughout the transition. Alex, in particular, had become her right hand, helping to manage the day-to-day operations and ensuring that the new systems were being implemented effectively. Sam worked on overseeing employee satisfaction initiatives, monitoring feedback, and making sure that people felt heard. One afternoon, Claire sat down with a small group of employees from various departments to hear firsthand about their experiences. It had been an initiative she was passionate about, getting input from the ground up from the people who knew the company best. As they sat around a table in the company's new collaborative space, Claire listened intently as they shared their thoughts. One employee, a young woman named Sarah, spoke up. "It's so different now," Sarah said. "I feel like I can finally breathe. Under Derek, I felt like I had to be perfect all the time or else I'd be punished. But now I feel like I can make mistakes, learn from them, and grow. It's a relief." Another employee, Mike, who had worked at the company for over 10 years, nodded. "I've been here a long time and I've seen a lot of leaders come and go. But this feels different. I can see that you're not just talking about change, you're making it happen. It's going to take time, but I'm excited about what's to come." Claire smiled, grateful for their feedback. This was why she had fought so hard to get rid of Derek. To give people the chance to be their best selves, to feel valued and supported. As the weeks turned into months, the company began to transform. Productivity increased, yes, but more importantly, employee satisfaction reached new heights. People no longer felt like cogs in a machine. They felt like they were part of something bigger, something that valued their contributions and took care of their well-being. And as for Derek? He had disappeared into the shadows, his name a distant memory. The board had quietly severed ties with him, and there were no more whispers of his power. His fall had been swift, but it was the company's rise that Claire was most focused on. The road ahead would always have its challenges, but for the first time in years, Claire could look forward to the future without the weight of Derek's toxicity looming over her. She had fought for the company, for the people who had stood by her, and for a vision of what a workplace could be when it was built on trust, respect, and collaboration. And now, as the company began to flourish, she knew that the future was bright for everyone involved. This wasn't just her victory. It was theirs. The transformation of the company was undeniable. Claire could feel it in every corner of the office, in every meeting, and in every interaction. The vision she had set out to build was becoming a reality, one step at a time. It wasn't just about replacing the toxic environment that had once defined the company. It was about creating something better, something lasting. It was about ensuring that no one ever again would feel the way they had under Derek's rule. Claire walked through the open office space, feeling the energy of the place. People were collaborating, laughing, and exchanging ideas freely. It was a far cry from the cold, silent office she had inherited. The change hadn't just been in the policies or the leadership. It had been in the people themselves. They were beginning to believe again in the company and in themselves. Her leadership team had worked tirelessly alongside her, keeping the momentum going. Alex, now her trusted co-leader, had become more than just a colleague. He had become a partner in every sense of the word. Their collaboration was seamless, their goals aligned. But beyond that, it was clear they were making a difference. People trusted them, and they could see it in the way employees responded to the changes. Today, Claire was preparing for something that had become a ritual since Derek's removal. A company-wide meeting to check in on their progress and reaffirm their commitment to the new vision. These meetings had started small, with just a few employees giving feedback. Now they had grown into a celebration of the work they were doing. She stepped into the conference room where the leadership team and a handful of employees were gathered. The atmosphere was warm, filled with an air of optimism. There were no long speeches today, no big announcements. This was about progress, feedback, and the path forward. "All right, everyone," Claire began, standing at the front of the room. "We're here today to reflect on where we've been and where we're going. It's been a journey, and while we've made incredible progress, we're just getting started." She smiled, glancing at the faces around her. Every person in this room had a stake in what the company had become. Each of them had contributed to the transformation, and Claire was proud to stand alongside them. "The biggest change I've seen," Claire continued, "is in the way we work together. The fear that once hung over this company is gone, and what's taken its place is a genuine sense of collaboration. The open-door policies, the transparency, the willingness to speak up. These are the things that will drive us forward." She looked around the room, her eyes settling on several employees who had shared their feedback during past meetings. "I know there are still challenges ahead, and I know there will be moments when we stumble. But we have built a foundation of trust that will hold strong, no matter what comes our way." The conversation shifted to the successes the company had experienced in the past few months. Employee turnover was down, productivity had increased, and most importantly, the culture was one of respect and inclusion. For Claire, these were the true measures of success. Yes, the financials had improved, but it was the human side of things that mattered most. Alex stood up and spoke next. "We're not just talking about a few changes here and there. We've completely redefined how we operate. And it's not just about the big things. It's about the little things. Checking in with one another, having honest conversations, making sure everyone has the tools and support they need to do their best work. That's what's making the difference." There were nods of agreement around the room, and Claire could see the pride in the eyes of her leadership team. They had weathered the storm, and now they were reaping the rewards. As the meeting continued, Claire reflected on just how far they had come. There were still things to iron out, projects to complete, challenges to overcome, but she had no doubt that the company was on the right path. She had inherited a broken system, one that had been twisted and abused by Derek. But now it was something new, something better. She had managed not only to save the company but to give it a future that was full of promise. After the meeting, Claire stayed behind in the conference room. Alex walked over to her, a grin on his face. "You did it, Claire," he said. "You really did it." Claire smiled, her exhaustion finally catching up with her. "We did it. I couldn't have done it without all of you. Without the team, without the employees who trusted us. It's not just me, it's all of us." Alex chuckled. "Well, I'm glad you're taking the credit. You deserve it." Claire leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment. "I just wanted to do what was right. This company deserved better than what it had, and so did the people who work here. I didn't want to just replace Derek. I wanted to give everyone something they could believe in." And in that moment, Claire knew that they had done it. The company had been through hell, but they had come out stronger on the other side. The toxic culture that had once plagued them was gone. Derek's shadow had long faded into nothingness, and in its place stood a company that valued its employees, that nurtured creativity, that embraced change. A few months later, Claire stood outside the company building, looking up at the sleek glass facade. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city. She had just finished one of the many meetings they now held with prospective clients, and for the first time in a long time she was proud of what they had built. But it wasn't just the success of the company that made her feel proud. It was the people, the ones who had stuck with her, who had worked hard to bring about the change they had all been hoping for. The employees who had trusted her and her leadership, who had put in the effort to build something better. They were the heart of the company, and that was what mattered most. As Claire turned to leave, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had faced down Derek's toxicity, had battled through the hardest days of her career, and now she was seeing the fruits of her labor. The company was stronger, more unified, and ready to take on whatever came next. There was no turning back now. This was just the beginning.